Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Each week, we gather to discuss how being a follower of Jesus impacts our everyday lives. Whether you have been a believer for a long time or still have lots of questions about faith, we would love to have you join us as we embrace the joy of a transformed life. Welcome back to Tuesday Talks. My name is Bridgett, and I will be your host today. And on the podcast, we are talking about dating. So this is week 2 in our summertime romance series, and I have 2 of my dearest friends, and we've been friends for over 10 years, so that's awesome. Rachel and Nick Charlton, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's okay. We're going to just roll with it. So glad to have you guys here. So we were joking that when I met you guys, you were my youth group leaders in youth group when I was just a little baby. And Rachel, you hated Nick.
I did.
And there's this funny story about getting a concussion, and then all of a sudden the stars aligned and you thought he was the greatest thing ever.
That is true.
100% accurate. No fake news there.
That's so great. So why don't you guys tell us a little bit about your family and then a little bit about your dating story?
Sure. I'll start.
All right.
I grew up in the Adirondacks, so 30 minutes away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And my family and your family attended the same church. And then I had gone to dental hygiene school and just felt like the Lord didn't want me there anymore. So I spoke to our pastor, and he suggested going to Word of Life. So I went there, did my first year, and loved it. And the Lord really, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I got saved later on. So when I went to Word of Life, it was like I had never experienced so much of Christ at one time, and it just like blew my mind, and I fell more in love with the Lord. And so that year, Word of Life changed my life. God changed my life at Word of Life during that year. And so I went back and did a second year, and that's when I met Nick. I mean, I knew Nick our first year, but I just knew of him, and it was funny because he dated a different girl. Mm-hmm. And my roommate and I, we would sit. So Nick and his other girlfriend would be at a different table, and they'd be like making eye babies. Like that's what we called it. And should I not tell the story?
Oh, go for it.
my roommate and I, we would be laughing about them staring deeply into each other's eyes, and we'd kind of be picking on them. Like, she would be like, "Oh, I'm Nick, and you can be, so-and-so." And we'd just be like, making eye babies and laughing about it. So I knew who Nick was, and I knew he liked rock climbing and, stuff that I was not interested in. So, but when we went back for second year at Word of Life, we were on, what was that called? Student council together. So,
which for those of you that don't know, that is a Christian college in upstate New York.
Yeah. So I was vice president and he was chaplain. And so we worked together all the time. And Nick was he was very godly, and everybody went to him for, all these questions. But he was really like goofy, and I used to call him like a goob because he just would say whatever was on his mind. And sometimes I'm like, that is inappropriate in the moment, like in the meeting, and I would just be like, oh my word.
But you'd be the only one laughing.
I would be. I'm like, oh man, everybody else is giving us dirty looks. But so that's how I got to know Nick.
Yep.
So you can take.
She was not easy to pursue. I will tell you that. She had a lot of walls up, and I had to break through them. I actually started when I decided that I knew that I wanted to marry her. So that's a big distinction. I want to talk about that later. But I knew that I wanted to marry her, not date her. I had got to know her so much that I was like, that's the woman God has put on this earth for me. And also, side note, not that I believe that there's the perfect soulmate for you out there, but for me, it was Rachel. I made my choice, and I was like, I have to make this work. And so I started a little project called Operation Wall Demolition. And I wrote her notes saying how great I thought she was. And just, I could just tell that there was things that she had to work on. And I would write notes of encouragement and just try and just penetrate through those walls. And eventually it took a concussion, as Bridgett said, to kind of knock me into her picture. And my joke was, Rachel's too godly to ever get a divorce, so I need to marry her before she hits her head again. Because once I seal the deal, we're good. But you know what? It's been 9 amazing years this month of marriage, April 29th. Mm-hmm. We have 2 kids. We have Macy, who is 7, and Jonah, that is 4. And I really couldn't be happier with our story. It's not perfect, but it has been amazing. Yeah. And we just hope that, by talking with you today, we can share some of the insights that we've learned and hopefully help people create wonderful stories of their own.
Yeah, I love that. And for me personally, Nick, I don't know if I've ever shared this. I'm emotional about it. The way that you have loved Rachel has been really safe for me as a single person. Because I have walked and seen God's story over the past 10 years, even from far away. And so I'm thankful for you guys. And I just as for the people that are listening, the hope of there actually are godly men and women, whether it's single men or single women, that honor one another and that really do put one another above that. And so I just want to say thank you for the testimony that you've lived out. You've lived out a lot through hell and back. And I'm just really thankful for what you guys carry upon your life of the covenant of marriage and what it means to love one another selflessly. So thank you both.
You're welcome. I'm glad.
So as I grab tissues, we're going to start our conversation. And so I want to talk about this. And so Christians have really been stupid with this whole topic. We have the very religious concept of 5 years in advance, I have to ask your dad on one end. And then we have this let's just go with the flow. Let's just do whatever we want type of mentality. And I do think that on both sides of the spectrum that there's a good heart behind it. There's, I don't want to use people. And then there's I don't want to be so over religious that I have to pray and wait for some angelic visitation to take someone out to coffee. And so let's kind of talk about that for a different. What is the difference between saying I am in a relationship with somebody and I'm interested in going on a date with someone? Can you kind of talk about that difference?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, for me, I like how you said, we've been stupid about it because I really don't like 21st century dating. I really don't. And it's kind of it's something I talk about all the time and we joke about because I love relationships. I love marriage and I love the process of dating. Typically, I just don't like how we do it sometimes. So for me, I think it is great when a body of like-minded people, so, if we're working within the church, a group of people that love Jesus and are trying to honor him with their lives, hang out, get to know each other, maybe go out for a meal or whatever, and just get to know each other, because it is so important to get to know people before you develop those heartstring attachments, kind of what I call guarding your heart, so that you don't get emotionally invested and hurt in a process that from an outsider looking at it, they would have said that path only led in one direction and it was going to lead in heartbreak. And so just this kind of innocent, platonic hanging out with people, I think you can learn so much from interacting in groups. I got to know Rachel by working with her. And I just got to know her and she got to know me. That there was so much that we learned about each other, that dating was an important step in kind of getting to know each other more. But there was so much fun of the process before it even got exclusive, So I would say just be friendly, go out and interact and get social once you can, because we're amidst, we're apart for now. But yeah, just get to know each other.
I think it really develops the friendship, which is so crucial in a relationship. Just, hanging out, being in different situations, seeing how they treat different people. It was so fluid for Nick and I because we had known each other for so long and we were friends. And I saw other girls go to him for advice. I saw the way he treated, quote unquote, the outcast. I saw his heart for, those who most people would be picking on. Like, I saw him in all of these different situations, and it allowed me to have a better judgment on the type of godly man he was.
Yeah. I had some questions come in on Instagram from our listeners about dating, and so I want to start with some of those. So the first question that someone had is it okay to flirt? In this, I'm not really sure if I want to put this person in the friend zone or in the romance zone. Like, what is this? You talk about this pursuit. Like, what is a godly, intentional pace of saying, hey, like, I might be romantically attracted to this person, but I'm also like not ready to be in a committed relationship. What is that flirting in between season?
I think I think Christians can be so, there's different ends of the spectrum when it comes to this.
Yeah.
And some can be like, I can't even like make eye contact with the opposite sex because they might think that I want to marry them, So being normal, like some personalities, I wouldn't say are more flirty, but are more bubbly. Mm-hmm. Like Nick has a very bubbly personality. So he was very flirtatious when we were not even a thing. But I think you can also go to the other end where it's so much putting yourself out there and it's almost like a call, like you want all the attention. So
yeah, I think it's important how we define flirting. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the definition in the dictionary, because I'm a nerd and I did that, it says, to behave in a way to either show attraction or to attract someone and for amusement, really, rather than for some serious kind of commitment. And that amusement side and what Rachel was alluding to, that attention-seeking side, I think is kind of dangerous. Yeah. And so, for me, I was very flirty. I've learned a lot more in my walk with Christ that I probably would have done things somewhat differently in my younger years. But I still think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But my flirting was very intentional and directed to the one person I knew I wanted to try and make things work with, rather than kind of being flirty with every person that came my way and just see, if I could, impress them or whatever. So, flirty could mean being friendly and being intentional in your friendliness. And I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it should be, let's go into a room and let's see how many people I can attract from being flirty, rather than saying, hey, I've watched this person. I really like this person. I want to show that there's something there. And I think we call that flirting, so yeah. I don't think that's bad, but you have to be everything in moderation, avoid the extremes.
Rein it in sometimes.
Yeah, rein it in. And sometimes, get loose. And, but essentially, if you're going to flirt, I would say make it intentional. Don't do it for amusement. Don't do it for attention. If you have found someone that you're like, man, I think God has put this person in my life, let them know it.
Go for it.
That's good. So I want to talk about this for a second because a lot of people do not have the luxury of being in a Christian college. We have a lot of people that are single much later in life, or, they're not in a place where they're surrounded by a lot of godly people. I know that Jefferson Bethke, that he talks about, to surround yourself with a bunch of godly people and pick one, kind of, we talked about that is, and I know I don't fall under the belief that there's one perfect person for you. I think that you choose who you get to serve. And of course, the Lord, blesses that and helps you figure that out, who's, a good choice. But where kind of is that line? Because you can have, in a really healthy, God-honoring way, like you can be getting to know platonically, just kind of opening some appropriate doors. Like, hey, I'm talking to a couple people right now. Where is that line? Nick, I really love to hear that from you from a man's perspective to, hey, I'm talking to a couple girls, to, hey, like, I need to stop doing that and say, hey, I'd like to take this person on a date. Kind of where's the appropriate way of honoring another person's heart, but also not being weird about it, of like, yeah, like I can, go to coffee with this person and then next week I can go to coffee with somebody else.
Yeah, I think from a guy's perspective, and I'm always harder on guys than I am on girls. And I think it works out well since I'm a guy. I kind of get to be more deliberate with them. But I really do think that, the guy needs to make sure that he's guarding girls' hearts. I was in college ministry for quite a few years, and I can't tell you the number of guys that I took out for a meal to help them understand that a girl thought he was about to propose to them. And he was like, I don't even like her. And, it was because he was doing all the things that a guy, you would think a guy would do. He would, he could be in a Nicholas Sparks movie, it was, and I'm looking at him and I'm like, how do you not know that this girl thinks that you're into her in a way that is leading towards marriage? He's like, I'm just being nice. And so there was this, innocence on his side, but he was going on one-on-one things with her all the time, showing her attention that he wasn't showing other girls, at least not to her knowledge and most people's knowledge. So it was just this innocence, but it went too far without any kind of defining what was going on, that the girl was just left to wonder. And her imagination, based off of everything we see in culture, was this is what a guy should do when he is trying to impress a woman. And so, for me, I like, the kind of the quote that you just gave us. I say, live your life as you follow Jesus, and then look to your left, look to your right, and see who's keeping up. Yeah. And so as you're, interacting with people, you might sit down and have a meal with someone. You might share coffee with someone. You guys might go to a movie, might go to mini golf, might do a bowling outing. And there might be a few girls that, for a guy, you might be initially physically attracted to. For a lot of guys, that's kind of our first kind of like, oh, there's a girl I notice. And hopefully it goes beyond that. And you kind of go, man, I really like, this girl or that girl. But, for me, and I love what you said, you got to make a choice and, and be confident in that choice and just say, hey, you know what? I really like this person for who they are. I love how they are walking in their relationship with Jesus. I love how they treat their parents, their friends, and other people. And I'm going to choose this person because this idea that you would, potentially be happier with girl number 3, 4, or 5, like it just for me, it just doesn't work that way. Like I just think that if two people love Jesus, that they can have an amazing relationship. And so I don't think we need to overcomplicate it. But for me, it always comes back to, do you trust that person's walk with Jesus for the believer? And if you trust that, develop that. So I hope that kind of helps a bit.
Yeah, that's good. Another one of our questions that we had was about either coming from different faith backgrounds or different denominations. So can you talk about that a little bit, about what are some of the boundaries and things like that you guys have understood in that sphere?
Yeah, do you want to take that one, or
you can start it, and then because we kind of had this conversation just a week ago.
Some of these were great questions, and we talked through them, getting ready for today. And Rach and I are pretty much on the same page with most things in life. We're very fortunate that way. But for us, when we were thinking about this, we think that the foundation has to be the understanding that Jesus died for your sins and rose again. We just celebrated that, in April. For Easter, and that for me has to be the foundation. That is for me the equally yoked. That is, we both have a saving relationship with Jesus, and we have a personal relationship with him. From there, I think the differences outside of that can make a relationship more or less challenging. If someone is more charismatic in their beliefs and another one isn't, that can cause tension a lot of times. So, sometimes we don't play nice in the sandbox. And that can make it hard.
I think it also has to do with personality too, depending upon where you is that something that's so important? Would you die on that hill?
Yeah. Like what are your values?
Yeah. What would you throw a stink about, So, but when Nick and I talked about it, it was, the gospel was the foundation, and, having a relationship with Jesus. And then after that, Nick and I, we both have very laid back personalities. So for us, it doesn't if that's what we have in common, then, our love for each other, our love for Christ, and then our love for each other really should be the foundation.
Yeah. And I will say this, there was a time in my life where I walked away from the Lord for a bit. Not that I stopped believing in him, but I wasn't living an honoring life. And what actually brought me back was a sermon. I decided to go to church again with a friend, and it was about vision. And it got to a point where they were relating the vision idea of the message to what vision do you have for your family? And I was dating at the time a non-believer, and it wasn't a God-honoring relationship. And what snapped me back was the idea of, what is this going to mean for my children? Yeah. And so for some people, the big thing for them is, I want to raise my children in a like faith. And when you have very different views, that can make it very complicated as well. And so, like Rachel said, if something is very, very important to you, then going outside of certain lines that you've drawn for yourself can make it very difficult, very challenging, and can be a difficult process. And so you have to kind of decide what is important for you. But I'd say a lot of those things fall in the preference category.
Yeah.
But that equally yoked idea is, they need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then from there, what is important to you. And if it is, don't compromise, because it will cause you pain later. So
yeah, love that. I think it's the difference between having someone that, is willing to be in covenant before God, compared to someone that maybe doesn't have, when we are in relationships with people that don't love Jesus, it's just a contract between people. And so not that, we don't love this person, we don't honor this person, we're not attracted to this person. But it's that, like, in order for me to honor you best, like, the only way I can do that is if we honor Jesus together and what that means. And so I think that's really great. As we continue, I want to kind of talk about two things. I want to talk about emotional boundaries and sexual boundaries. Again, this is a conversation that has zero shame. And so we're going to be able to unpack some stuff. And regardless of your past, I really do believe that we've all made emotional and sexual decisions that going back we would have changed. And so wherever you are, whatever your history's been, just know that number one, you can reach out if you need to process with somebody, but also two, like, these conversations are not to shame us. And God's not afraid of sex. God actually created us to be sexual beings. And so as we have this conversation, I just want to share that for those that are listening. And so the first question that I have is, number one, like, why is it so important that we save sex for marriage? That's question number one. And part two of that is, when do you share that? If you're getting to know somebody, and you're not, this can be a person. We have a lot of people that go to church, that believe in Jesus, that are saved, but their boundaries on sexuality are different than ours. Number one, why is sex so important to save for marriage? And two, how do we communicate that when we're pursuing a relationship with someone?
Yeah. You want me to tackle this one?
Sure.
So, for me, and, for those of you who are listening, I came into my marriage with Rachel, not being a virgin. And so I did have my own shame and stuff that I had to work through. And like Bridgett said, Christ forgives all. And so I was able to move into my relationship with Rachel, knowing that I had not only Jesus' forgiveness, but it's something that Rachel and I talked about and discussed. Yeah. But why is it so important? I mean, just from outside of a biblical perspective that I'll share here in a second, I mean, I brought pain into Rachel's life by, her waiting for me and me not waiting for her. Rachel had in the early stages of our marriage had to deal with, comparison battles, Did Nick enjoy sex with someone else more than he enjoyed? Like, a wife shouldn't have to think through those kind of things. It shouldn't have to be like that. And guys have, a big ego. We'll struggle with the same thing. I didn't have to, but man, did Rachel enjoy it with someone else more than she enjoyed it? Like, that's difficult. But, I've been studying, obviously dating and stuff. It's one of the things I love to do, and being in college ministry, I work with a lot. And Ephesians 5, it just really stands out to me. And I just want to read it real quick. Ephesians 5:1 says, "Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And then I love whenever I see buts in scripture. And so verse 3 says, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you. And I just find it so interesting that when Paul is telling us to be imitators of God, the first contrast that he brings in is sexual immorality. And I really do think that from the Old Testament all through the way out the New, sexual purity is a big one for God. You couldn't worship in the Old Testament temple without being going through a cleansing period after having appropriate relationships with your wife. Yeah. I think God wanted to keep such a distinction from how pagan worship was happening that involved a lot of these practices. And it says, no, like for me, it's different. And sex is a gift, but it has its boundaries. And when we go outside of those boundaries, scripture not only says that it hurts the person like me, it hurt me to be, sexually active before marriage, but it also hurt the person that I love more than anything. And so that is something that we were able to work through and that forgiveness covered. But, if you can wait, it is the best gift you can give your spouse. And if you haven't, the next best gift is to start today.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. When Nick and I had first met, before he even started pursuing me, we were on Christmas break, and I had saved myself, for marriage. And my mom said to me, have you ever thought about, marrying somebody who had not saved themselves for you? I hadn't. So her saying that to me prompted me to start a conversation with God. And praying about my heart and how I would receive that information, what that would look like. And so I started praying through that. And then I just kind of felt like the Lord was saying to me, okay, Rachel, like, prepare yourself for this. Yeah. Didn't know why. And then 2 months later, Nick was pursuing me, and I knew he was interested in me. And he said when hey, I want to talk to you. This was after you had told me you wanted to marry me. And I was like, okay, he looked like he was sweating bullets. And I was like, yeah, sure. What's going on? And, he said, before you even say yes, that you would want to be in a relationship with me, or that before I'm even going to continue to pursue you, I want you to know this, that I have had sex before. Yeah. And, I was like, okay. Yeah. The Lord had already prepared my heart for that. And, I knew in that moment it was confirmation from God that he had gone before us and prepared my heart for that. And so he said, he was so shocked, right?
I was like, that's it?
Yeah, I didn't need another conversation. Not that it didn't bring its struggles into our marriage. Our first year of marriage was tough. Just, wondering, had all these questions that came up. And even Satan will use it today for silly stuff that doesn't even matter. I'm able to, quickly, get it out of my mind, renew my mind with something else. But it stays with you. There, when we parent our children and they get a consequence, the thing we say to them, this is like, we say this over and over to them when they get in trouble. When you don't do things God's way, life hurts. And it's just how it is in anything, especially in this.
Yeah. So, obviously I took the approach of sharing that information before we even started a dating relationship. And that would be my advice. And here's some encouragement. And no shame on anyone. Like if you were to share this with someone and they decided that, no, I can't date you, don't shame that person for feeling that way, and don't feel shame yourself, because, sometimes we want to almost get someone so invested in us and get them to know the new us and the true us and not the past us. And then we slam them with some information and it just makes them feel like you were deceiving them the whole time. Like, well, why didn't you just share this from the beginning? Well, I was afraid that, until you got to like me, you couldn't accept that. So, trust God in every process.
Yes.
Protect the people that you're looking to be in a relationship, and trust God for the results. Because, I mean, if you're like Bridget and I, and you don't believe that there is the one perfect person out there, God's going to bring the right person at the right time into your life. And so guard people's hearts and protect them emotionally from getting invested in something that maybe, God primed Rachel's heart to be with someone that wasn't a virgin when they got married. But some people, it was such a big commitment to them that, they want it reciprocated. And you have to honor that for them too. So.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying what I'm hearing you. And it kind of does answer our second question of when do you bring that up? And so everybody's story is different. Like I said, for you guys had known each other for a long time. Not a long time, but a good amount of time. It wasn't like this is someone that you just, met one week and whatever. And so what I'm hearing you say, not necessarily that before you're dating, but before you are committing to pursuing a relationship towards marriage, that's when you're having that conversation. Because for you had known each other for a while. For some people, like you're not, I'm not sharing, all of my deepest, darkest secrets before we, go to the movies or go to coffee.
Your first coffee date, you won't be saying, "Oh, hey, by the way." Like, you could come across as a weirdo if you're doing that. No, all in time, all in due time.
Yeah. So, if you're looking at it as, hey, I'm intentionally hanging out with different people in group settings or, more platonic settings, and not getting to the point where I'm holding hands with 5 different girls or kissing 5 different girls, but once you have narrowed it down to, I want to start this pursuit of marriage relationship with this one person, my recommendation is let that person know before things take off.
Yeah. And 2 other things I want to add is, number one, there's a video, I'll put it in the show notes. Moral Revolution is an awesome ministry, and they have a podcast episode with Jason Valatin. It's called The Intimacy Ladder. And so he kind of has this main teaching that says your level of intimacy, whether physical or emotional, should never surpass your level of trust. And so in the world, we see this especially in movies, and just kind of the normal dating is date 1, you're kissing her goodnight. Date 2, date 3, you're having sex. You're dating for a while, you're moving in together, and then 10 years later, you're getting married, and then 2 years later, you're divorcing. And so we see this concept. And so what I want to say is, I know a lot of people who were sexually active before marriage that lived in sexual purity and were able to come into marriage like with a heart of sexual purity, because it's not about the action. Again, of course, we're going to say that, God's best design is that we would wait and have it within covenant. Because like what Nick said earlier about the boundaries, I love the analogy, I forgot who this is from, about like sex is like fire. And so when you have it in a fire pit and you can, make s'mores, it's wonderful. When it catches the whole forest on fire and destroys people's homes, not good. Again, same thing, different context, different time. And so I want to say another awesome thing is I really encourage people that before you get married, that you have processed through your sexual history with another person. Your spouse should not be the first person, whether that's a counselor or a pastor, a life coach, whoever it is that you're sitting. I love some of the counselors that I follow. They follow this model called a full life grieving or a full life repentance. And literally you sit and you bring every skeleton out of the closet, so that when you're coming and you're saying, hey, it doesn't just have to be sexual things, it can be whatever it is. When you're coming and saying, hey, I just want you to know this is what's gone on, you're not coming and saying, oh, I hope that you approve of me. It's saying, I want to give you this option because I honor you, but regardless of your input back to me, I have come before the Lord, and I know that all of these sins I've brought out into the light, and that I stand now fully reconciled to the Father. So whether or not you want to pursue this any further because of it, it's already out in the open. And so I know I kind of said a lot there, but I think number one, especially with sexual stuff, like your spouse, especially in Christian circles, if you carry shame because of sexual experiences, whether that was abuse or trauma or consensual or whatever it was, that your future spouse is not the first person you're sharing this with. This has already been brought into the light with safe people, so that you can, people, I've watched beautiful marriages happen where people have had this sexual reconciliation with a father, so that they are going into marriage. Of course, there's those hard things and those hard, Rachel, I love that you shared that so beautifully. Like, those are questions that the enemy will throw against people of like, oh, well, what if you're not as good or whatever? But we don't have to live in shame, and we don't have to make it this hush hush. Oh, well, my spouse is the only person that knows this about me.
Right.
Yeah, we share our story with anyone. And I think there's a level of like, oh man, like we got to remind ourselves of our past when we do that. But God, because like you said, we've dealt with them. We know that, one, I'm forgiven and accepted by my Savior. And also I'm forgiven and accepted by my wife, that we can work through that. And we want to use our story to be a tool of encouragement to people. So yeah, I think that's a great point, Bridgett.
Cool. So my next question is, let's talk about emotional boundaries. I have this conversation a lot of, I watch a lot of people who have been way emotionally intimate on a level that's really committed. And so they've just kind of, which I think that kind of opens the door to cross more physical boundaries as you're, going in that direction. Can we just talk about that? What does it mean to have healthy emotional boundaries within dating relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're leading somewhere that, I try and focus on a lot is, the longer that you're in a relationship with someone, the more intimacy that develops. And intimacy can be developed through a spiritual connection, just feeling that oneness in Christ. There's an intimacy there. There's an intimacy from sharing physical experience, but then there's also that emotional experience. And any of those can kind of cross into the other and encourage kind of movement towards those things. So emotional boundaries, I mean, we have the saying that we use because, you see a lot on the college campuses, people, quote unquote dating, but, oh no, she's not my girlfriend, or he's not my boyfriend. And we tell people all the time, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we say, okay, I know I'm not interested in pursuing this and committing to this. You might be in that very platonic, what I would call that group setting stage, but you're developing all these emotional boundaries that essentially put you into the practical side of dating and commitment. And that just causes a lot of confusion and can also cause a lot of hurt. So from that emotional boundary standpoint, I think there's some important or some practical steps that you could put into place. Like one, I mean, we know how we interact with different people. We kind of have our own set of guidelines. Don't do for, one person that you wouldn't do for everyone if you want that relationship to look like every other relationship, you know? So for example, I'm not going to go and, to give a different analogy, I'm not going to go hold hands with every girl because that's not how it works. And so just be careful about how much you are emotionally invested in that. And I think both sides of the equation have to be careful here. I think guys need to be sensitive to what girls could be perceiving. And I think girls need to be, perceptive of what guys could be perceiving. We talked a little bit about flirting. Sometimes flirting, kind of says, hey, come engage with me more. But that wasn't really your intent. So I think emotional boundaries is a difficult one, but the more you share about who you are and, even when you're talking about some of your deepest, darkest things, that's developing intimacy. Because if that person accepts you in those conversations, you've just developed more emotional ties to that person. And it may be beyond the level of trust even. Some people are just very conversational and they'll just get comfortable and go, but they don't really trust that person.
Yeah.
Or it might be beyond the level of that relationship. Like there's just some things that you don't need to share. So that wasn't very specific, but you might be able to get specific.
Well, I was just thinking about I was counseling this girl, and what had developed with her and this guy was she had become emotionally dependent upon him. Mm-hmm. So he filled a need of hers that Christ should have been fulfilling. So I had to, we worked through that together, but it was not an addiction to him, but it was when I am sad, I'll reach out.
Yeah.
When I need a pick me up, I'll reach out. When, so it was an emotional dependence.
Yeah.
And he was taking it one way and she had seen it a different way. And so, I think sometimes we feel that spot in our heart that Jesus needs to fill with someone else. And, like having the best interest of the other person, loving the other person the best that we possibly can, sometimes means, holding back on that emotion. And, when we were on the college campus, we were working with all these college students. A lot of times, Nick would be talking to the guy, and just because of the atmosphere, the girls would come to me and be like, I know he's going to ask me to go out on a date, or, and that was just not there. And so I just think we have to be so intentional in how we're communicating with each other, and really just loving one another. And, how are they taking it? And I think having open and honest conversations is so important. Hey, where are we at? I'm very bluntly honest.
Yep.
And so I want that. I want to know, what's going on here? Do you like me? Do you not? And so having those open and honest conversations up front allow for the emotional barrier to stop at certain places along the way.
I think that's a huge red flag. One of my famous sayings that I use a lot in my teaching is that love says no. And so if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're not allowed to have needs, or be able to say, hey, I'm not comfortable going any further with this conversation, or whatever it is, and they're going to throw a tantrum and threaten to leave, then like that shows you their character. A person that actually has true character and integrity, you can, I use this phrase a lot, even in my friendships, of I do not have the emotional capacity to do that today, to have this conversation. Can we make space for this conversation tomorrow?
Yeah.
I love that.
Whatever, if it's a disagreement of, I totally agree that we have to process through this, because in my heart, I have this, I don't want to see you ever again. I cannot have this conversation today. Let's make time to do that tomorrow. And if, that person, whether that's romantic or if that's just a friendship thing, it'll show me their character when they say, okay, I want to honor you in that. Yes, let's please do that. But if they say, no, like we have to do this right now. Like, do you love me? Do you love me? Like, whoa. Like,
Yeah.
Chill out. I don't have time for that. Don't have time for that.
Yeah. As you guys were talking, I was thinking, you shouldn't be manipulated into doing something, and you shouldn't do something to manipulate someone else. Right.
Yeah.
So if that is there, that's a boundary we shouldn't cross.
And it's not true love.
No.
It's not really loving someone else. So,
yeah. So as we kind of close out our time together, I have a question for each of you. Rachel, I'm going to have you start. Rachel, what do you wish that you could tell all the single ladies?
So growing up, I think all girls have a picture of what the guy that they're going to marry is going to look like, or how he's going to act, or what he's going to do. I'm getting emotional because I had such a different picture of who I would marry. And I think I was so resistant to Nick because he wasn't what I thought. And I didn't know, I didn't know that I would be sick, chronically ill.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that God, I'm just so thankful that God worked in my life and in my heart to say yes to Nick, because I can't imagine anybody else carrying me to the bathroom when I can't walk, or doing some of the grossest things he's had to do because I couldn't do them, or being up with me at night because I'm having a seizure, or making my breakfast day in and day out and never complaining. And I always say, like, I'm so thankful for what God did in my life with Nick, because I got way more than I ever could have dreamt of. And it's not always about, rainbows and butterflies, but it's about finding someone who truly loves the Lord and wants to serve him, because he'll serve you, And so, I'm just so thankful. And it's not, Nick wasn't like, I didn't see Nick across the room and think, oh, wow, like, look at him. He could be, a Baywatch guy, or, whatever. Bad analogy maybe. But I remember looking across the room and thinking, wow, there's somebody who really loves Jesus with his whole heart. And so took a while for my flesh to be like, oh, okay. But I'm so thankful for, what God has done. And so, ladies, don't look for what you think, but look for who God has for you, and just be sensitive to the Spirit and the working of the Spirit in your heart, and just follow him, because he'll send you to the right person.
Yeah, love that.
So,
Nick, what are you going to tell our dudes?
All right, guys. I think this is a saying that I say a lot. I'll do two things. One, women are image bearers to be honored and not objects to be manipulated. So I say that a lot.
Say that again.
So women are image bearers to be honored, not objects to be manipulated. And so when you have that concept in your head that this is someone made in God's image, what does it look like then to honor them as you would honor God? So for me, do not pursue dating relationships, until you have that figured out. And the big one for me, I also have the same, no one will be able to date my daughter until they deal with their sexual immorality issues.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm never going to hold someone's past against them, because if Rachel's dad did that to me, I would have never got Rachel. And so for me, it's not about what have you done, but what are you doing? So if you are looking at pornography, or if you're in, inappropriate relationships, put a stop to that, chase after Jesus and get that right. And then go honor women. So that'd be number one. Number two would be, and we didn't get really to discuss this. And I you asked the question, but I didn't get to fully answer it. Physical boundaries.
Yeah.
And I want guys to take the lead on this, because I think we need to. And my guideline for guys for this is, this is the PG-13 part of the episode. When Mr. Happy stands to attention, you've gone too far. All right. And so what I mean by that is, as guys, we are very driven sexually. And when we allow the engine to get turned on, we're going to want to see that go to completion. And now we're going to fight that battle. We're going to say, no, I know what is right and I know what is wrong. And so I'm only going to go this far, and I'm only going to go this far, and I'm only going to go this far. Well, every time you turn on the engine and you don't let it run through completion, it gets harder and harder and harder and harder and harder and harder to say no to that lure of physical pleasure. And how I kind of say that is, we are supposed to fight our battles in spirit and not in flesh. And when we allow this fleshly battle to go on of, I'm going to start something, but I'm going to say, oh, we're only going to make out for 15 minutes. And then we're going to stop. And that's our boundary. Or, you're just fighting a battle that cannot be won in the flesh. The way to fight is say, how has God created our bodies? And what does it look like to honor God with our bodies? And so for some people, that means holding hands. Some days is going to be off the table, and sometimes it can be, hey, I can hold your hand, or I can kiss, or we can cuddle, but be intentional there, because if your end goal is to save yourself for marriage, whether you are making that new commitment after making some mistakes, or you haven't gone there yet, there's a path that gets you there. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I learned was setting a boundary physically that was, I'm not going to allow myself to get defrauded in starting something that I know biblically I'm not allowed to finish. Yeah. So I'm going to set my standard in my day-to-day interaction with the person I'm pursuing based on how am I doing, in my purity thoughts and all that. And some things are going to be on the table and some things are going to be off the table. But if you follow that principle, you're not going to have issues.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's really important, especially in the religious shame culture of sex, that it's really healthy and normal for our bodies to be turned on by people. And so that's not wrong. But it's the, am I asking how far we can go before I'm crossing boundaries? Or am I how can we set ourselves up for success that I want to make sure that I'm creating boundaries that are honoring both of our bodies? Because if you can't do that in single life, that's not going to change in marriage. Whether that's regards to sickness or that's regards to, after having children or whatever it is, it's not like you get married and then sex is a free-for-all forever. And so being able to set those boundaries in dating is going to be the same level of honor that you give for someone's body when you're in marriage as well.
Yeah, exactly. The boundaries that I had to establish to work on my purity issues and that I established before I even started dating Rachel, I still live by those today.
Yeah.
For me personally, because I had such a past in it, I don't watch a movie today that has any nudity in it, any female nudity. I just don't. And what I realized is that for people that on the guys end or girls end that struggle with sexual purity, specifically, it's not a battle that we just, get to win and then we stop fighting it. It's one that we apply the biblical principles of purity every day of our lives. And as long as we keep that going, you'll be on the right track. But if you feel, ooh, you know what, I think I've conquered it, I won't have an issue with it. And you start bringing things into your life that brings in imagery that isn't helpful or thoughts that isn't helpful, you'll start losing the battle again. So I think you're so right. Marriage isn't the cure to sexual issues. If you can deal with all those first and apply them throughout your marriage, you'll live a long, happy marriage. We've enjoyed 9 years so far. It's been great. And we're looking for many, many more. So
love that. I'm just going to mention this quick. We can't have a full conversation on pornography today, but there is an excellent resource. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. It's an online course by John Bevere. It's called Porn Free. And so it's for men and women in pornography addictions to walk in sexual wholeness and freedom. And so I highly recommend that resource that I will put in for our listeners. But guys, thank you so much. I know we could really easily talk for another 2 hours and still have more to say, but thank you so much for taking the time. And again, just I'm so honored by the testimony and the love that you've lived out throughout these past 10 years, and just bless you in the next decade to continue to influence people in just their relationships for kingdom living.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much, Bridgett.
It's been so fun.
Awesome. Well, guys, have a great day. And for all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining. If you have been impacted by this episode, please share. You can share with your friends on social media, always using the hashtag Tuesday Talks with SAC. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So go ahead and either send us an email or reach out over social. We'd love to hear. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Alliance Church. Let us know your thoughts by leaving a review, and be sure to subscribe, rate, and share. If you would like to join our conversation on social media, be sure to use the hashtag Tuesday Talks with SAC. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.